taking the class, first of all, because I don't know how they get that in their head is, I can't take a class, I'm not a master gardener. That's the purpose. That's why we're here, is to, not even to turn you into master gardeners, but to help you along that path. And I think that out of all the programs and all the stuff that you're going to hear during this program, it's not the individual topics that's going to gain you the most information, it's knowing where to go for the resources. And you've got a good one in your manual, but also people are great resources. So I would highly encourage you to come to the, what is called the association meetings, and get to know other gardeners, because they've all got something to share, and there's a lot of value in that. My name's Kelly Jackson. I'm the board agent in Christian County in Hopkinsville, and I've been working with Extension for about 27 years, and we have a Master Gardener group that's turning 20, which is younger than your group. I think this group is, you know the age off the top of your head? Older than 20, and so we're excited about that. We've got about 70 Master Gardeners, and we put on a big garden expo in the spring in Hopkinsville, the Outdoor Lawn and Garden Show. So I encourage you to come and visit that. We do some unusual things in Christian County. Maybe it's not that unusual. Every time you talk to other ag agents, their mind is blown. But we do a program called beer gardening, which is held down at the brewery in Hopkinsville. We've got a class there in about 2 weeks. It's on that particular topic is on putting your garden to rest, like things you think about for your vegetable garden going into winter time. And it's been great to get new people into. You don't have to come and drink beer. You just come and be in the cool atmosphere, and it's really been a neat place.
Do you have any information on where and what time and all that good stuff?
Sure, yeah.
I go to Hopkinsville, yeah.
If you want to see what we have coming up, go to our Facebook page. That's probably the best. If you don't do Facebook page, I'm trying not to do Facebook anymore. I can give you our contact information, and as long as your agent doesn't mind, we can put you on our home gardener email list. We don't want to compete, but that's how we get all the word out about upcoming classes too. So, it's called Hello Garden, if you're interested in that. So this morning, I have just like your agent here, we wear a lot of different hats. So this morning I spoke for about 2 hours to produce growers about produce safety, making sure that what they grow in the field makes it to market without being contaminated. And so my voice is about already shot. And so now we're going to switch gears. We're going to talk about trees. I like talking about trees more than any of the other topics in the Master Gardening program. It's kind of my passion. I've been a certified arborist for 25 years, about that long. And a couple of years ago, I got the tree risk assessment qualification, which just helps people know, help make better decisions on whether or not trees have to be removed, have to be taken down. Ideally, we'd like to leave all the trees, but that's not very practical in every situation. So we're not going to get into that tonight. We're going to start with the basics. We're going to talk about site selection first. And really, when you think about trees, so many of the issues that we deal with in the landscape could be just non-existent if we just took a little bit of time on the site selection. And I can relate that. One time we had have you heard of the Victory Garden? It's a really old TV show. I don't know, does it play anymore?
I haven't seen it in forever.
Yeah, so there was a guy on there, he had a big white beard and suspenders, and we were at a conference and he spoke, and I'm not going to do this, but he jumped up on the table and was pretending like he had a hoe out in his garden, and he said, the problem with your gardens is you don't prepare, you don't plant, and you just go out and start planting things and put trees out, and you don't prep for a vegetable garden, and so they suffer and they die and they get diseases. You've got to spend a good amount of time on the soils. So even though I like trees, I think soils, if you haven't, I've already forgotten what you just showed me. I don't remember if you have soils yet, but it's one of the most crucial. It's the building block for everything that we're going to learn. So soils is very, very important in getting a good grasp on that and then applying it and not being like so many of us running through the box store and saying, oh, those are on sale. And then trying to find a home for it is an error, right? So we first start with our site and try and pick out what fits best for that site. So let's get into site selection. I did a program for our horticulture webinar Wednesday, so if you're not familiar with that program, it's every Wednesday at 11:30 for us here in the West. And it's online, it's Zoom, it's free, and the topic that I did was on abiotic tree and shrub issues. Okay, so abiotic meaning not disease, not insect, environmental, or some other stressor. And I'm convinced that based on all the site visits that I've made and phone calls that I get, that probably close to 75% of our real problems with trees and shrubs in the landscape are haybog. And most of those are tied to planting that in the wrong location, the wrong site. And so we want to try to address some of that. Just looking at some site factors, I gotta find a good spot to stand. Looking at some site factors, obviously when we talk first about placing, let's think trees to start with. We need to be aware of what's around us, and so if you're not familiar, surely goodness, master gardeners know to call 811 before you dig, right? So we're not busting up lines. So we have to be aware, and I think so many times mistakes are made by thinking, well, this tree's only this tall and the power line's up there, it's not gonna be a problem, but it will be a problem if your tree is successful and keeps growing, so you've got to pay attention to those types of things. Also, looking at existing plants that might be on the site or in your landscape. If you have some sort of an ornamental cherry that gets a leaf blight every year and defoliates by August, maybe you should switch a different type of plant. Don't keep going with the same type of plant, right? So look for declining health in those. Orientation, whether or not they're getting sun, and one of the poster childs I guess we can talk about for that is flowering dogwood. Everybody loves a flowering dogwood. They're great trees. They're beautiful trees. I don't recommend planting flowering dogwoods because people want to plant them right out in full sun. And if you ever notice where they're supposed to be grown, they need afternoon shade. They need protection from bigger trees. They're an understory tree. And so orientation, thinking about trying to fit a flowering dogwood in a brand new landscape with no shade, at least try to plant it where it gets the shade of the house in the afternoon. That's awesome. Soil drainage and soil chemistry is what we want to jump into a little bit more. So this is called a soil percolation test. If you're not familiar, you haven't been gardening on your property for long, this would be a good place to start as we think about some of the concepts with soil. It's pretty simple, and we have a publication called ID 237. I'll give you a link, you don't have to write these down. I'll give you a link at the end that you can go to, and all these publications are listed. So this tells you how to do it, but basically you dig a hole, there's some dimensions, you won't go into the details. Go dig a hole and pour water in it, and then you add more water to it after that drains out, and then you time how long it takes for the water to seep into the soil. If it drains really, really fast, then you have a soil that's going to be really drought prone. It's probably going to be a very dry soil, very rocky. When I was in Tennessee, there was a word we used a lot called chert, which is kind of like hard compacted blocks of clay. I don't see that quite as much here, but we do have a lot of clay soils. But if it drains really slowly, which is a thick clay soil, then you have a poorly drained site. And there's some things you're going to have to make some adjustments to be able to grow in that. So what if you have a dry soil? I'm going to guess that most of our soils, okay, let me rephrase that. It's really easy to think broad and general and think, well, West Kentucky, we got so much clay, it's all going to be poorly drained sites, right? But there's some things that's done during home construction that can really mess up your soil, okay? So raking off topsoil, compacting soil, and it can change one type of soil to a different type of soil, and you may never be aware of it. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But if you have dry soils, what we're typically going to see is late season droughts are going to be more common, and you're going to see more suffering on those trees. So we want to pick trees that use water efficiently so that you're not always having to irrigate. How many of you have trees right now that are defoliating or turning brown and getting crispy leaves, right? So that's basically because we've had a 2-week drought. At least I think you guys have. I know we have. Hopefully rain's coming this weekend. Let's hope that it does. So what can we do to help alleviate that besides water? The one thing we can do when we have the option is incorporating organic matter into the soil. And that's over a broad range. So it's easier to think about that in terms of a new tree planting. And we're not talking here about putting organic matter in a planting hole. I'll show you that in a minute. Over a broader area, working up a new bed, or even just a single tree, going out and around that tree and adding some organic matter and tilling that into the soil can make a great improvement on dry soils. Also, plant resistant plants so that when we do have droughts, which we commonly do, they won't suffer as badly. So we've got some good examples here of drought tolerant trees. That doesn't make them, there's a man that was just here, I forgot his name already. Bud was just here, and he was complaining about his sweet gum tree. I'm not saying they're perfect trees. Sweet gums have their own problems with those spiky balls that they drop. But when it comes to tolerating some drought, they can take it, right? So you have to kind of weigh some of your options. If you're looking at some drought-tolerant shrubs, I've got a list of some options there. And I've got some pictures for you to kind of see. So yellowwood is a native Kentucky tree that does well in drought soils or in drought temperatures or drought seasons. Smoke bush, anybody grow smoke bush? That's good puffy blooms, yes. So they don't seem to get any sort of stress related to drought. Ginkgo is a beautiful, beautiful tree. You'll notice that this one has a name actually out of gold. Make sure if you purchase a ginkgo tree, if you haven't heard this before, you need to get a named cultivar because you haven't bought me already. So ginkgo is one of those monoecious. They got male and female trees, and the female tree has a fruit that doesn't smell good. So you want to make sure you get a named cultivar because those are all males and it won't drop fruit for you. In shrubs, beautyberry, that's a great tough plant. It's good for rain gardens as well. Cotoneaster, and then ninebark. Can't say enough good things about ninebark. Put it in a dry soil. It'll show up again in wet soils. Put it on a rock. It doesn't care. It just grows, and it's perfect. It's a great plant. Yeah, let's keep going. So wet soils. So these are the soils that are not draining very well, and that's an issue. And a lot of times we think about, well, our roots are underground. Does that really even matter? They want water anyways. Well, it matters a lot because when you get to the soils chapter, you'll learn that soils are 50% something and 50% nothing. That's a good soil. And that nothing is airspace. And you need that airspace in your soil. And if it's poorly drained, that means you've got 50% something, which should be your sandstone clay. You've got 50% more sandstone clays because it's compacted and it does not drain very well. And that's not going to be a good situation for trees. It can cause fungal root diseases. It can cause trees to topple or wind throw. We were just talking about tree risk and when trees might fall over at the base, but it doesn't happen very often unless you've got a very wet soil and the soil stays saturated. Then it can cause trees to blow over at the ground. Some trees that work really good for poorly drained sites, I've got listed up here. Bald cypress is a great one. We just redid our landscape at our office, and we didn't put in bald cypress because they get to be a pretty big tree. We put pond cypress, which is kind of a different species, because that site does tend to hold a little bit more water than others. Swamp white oak, I think, is probably one of the best oak trees that's out there. Oaks generally are kind of slow growing, but swamp white oak and willow oak pretty much on par with red maples as far as speed growing. That's usually the holdback for some people on oak trees. Some shrubs for poorly drained sites: buttonbush, red twig dogwood, Virginia sweetspire. Just to pick out a few. Here's some pictures. So there's red sunset maple. There's a swamp white oak in the middle. Not a huge white oak. You know, the ones that get 150 feet tall, it stays smaller than that, about 60, I guess it tops out at. Black gum, probably not a better tree for fall color than a black gum. Bright reddish, orangish tinges, and again, it can take more than just wet soils, so it can also take some dry soils too. Sputnik. Sputnik is this button bush. Looks like one of the original space satellites called Sputnik. There's a plethora. Summer sweet is another common name, and then red twig dogwoods can take it. And you put those in the sun as well. Another option for poorly drained soils is to, maybe you don't need to dig a hole. Just put it on top of the ground. You know, when you talk about vegetable gardening, if your soil is not that great, what do we tell you to do? Build a raised bed, right? Raise it up, put new soil in, and plant on top of that. That can work for trees and shrubs as well. It's probably a good idea to kind of break up that surface layer first, just a shallow tilling, but then setting your shrubs and things right on top of the ground and mounding soil up. And there's kind of a formula there for you to follow. I've seen some really good examples of this at new neighborhoods where there was nothing but pasture field before. They built homes, and then they needed some privacy, especially for the houses closest to the road. And so they did a massive berm that was probably 15 feet wide with trees and shrubs, and they just piled the dirt up and planted on the surface to give some elevation, immediate elevation, instead of waiting on those trees to grow. Okay, other plant factors, thinking about our cold hardiness tolerance zone. And how many of you seen this already? This is new. This is new information. It just got updated. Say new. 2 years. Is that still new? Sure. That's And we are all green, but we're these variances of green based on, if you look at that little chart below here. And so for McCracken County, it looks like you fall as a 7A. Can you confirm that? Okay, 7A, which is where they put Hopkinsville as well. I don't know. I know that's what the data says. I'm a little hesitant on that. I still lean more to the 6, maybe a 6B, but into the 7. I mean, look at the temperature range, 0 to 5. Has it ever gotten below 0, which you can remember? Because it only takes a little bit of time for that to go below 0 and cause some dieback or damage to plants. And that's where we tend to get some more abiotic problems because of low dips and temperatures like that. But anyway, that's where we are right now, 7A. I wouldn't rush out and plant palm trees is what I'm trying to say. There's also a heat hardiness zone that you can look up. The last time that I checked, we were at zone 7 on that as well, and that just means that during the summertime, they can't take above a certain temperature. And that really bugs me, because if you go to some of the box stores, you'll find plants that are cold hardy, because things like heath and heather and those types of things, they're cold hardy here, no problem. They grow in like zone 4. But when it gets hot during the summer, they do not like it. They do not do well, and they still sell those. I don't know why. Other factors, your soil preference, the moisture preference, light preference of these trees, so thinking through and looking through guidebooks and those types of things to pick, but we usually always start with size. So consider some of these things that are more permanent, including size, before you go and pick out a tree. Oh, there's that pizza up there, so you can see where we are located up in the 7. Pizza. Okay, so planting. 3 different types of plants, 3 different ways that plants are sold. We don't have to spend a whole lot of time on bare root, because typically around here anyways, maybe you guys have a different nursery, they're about this big when you get a bare root. It's usually at an arborvitae net, and they hand you a little tree in a sack, and you take it home and plant it. And that's great. It'll get caught up. It'll grow, and you should plant those trees. Don't toss them. But in other places, there's nurseries up in New York, for example, that sell bare root trees that are 3-inch caliber. And there's no root ball. It's all root mass, and you can pick up a whole 3-inch caliber tree that's 7 foot tall and walk it out to your landscape and put it in the ground. That's nice, because now you can see what's going on with the root system and if there's any issues, but we can't really get those around here. I did call them one time, it's been a while, and I said, I would like to get a few of these trees for you guys. And they said, no problem. And I said, I just need like 5. I said, oh no, we only sell these by the semi-load. No, we do not have a need for that. So we're typically going to get ball and burlap or container grown, and there's some pros and cons to both of those. So there's our bare root, very inexpensive typically, transports easily, it's lightweight. You get to see all the root mass. Disadvantages to those, you got a very short window to get these in the ground. This is not a time to go out and plant a bare root tree, right? It's not going to do well. And usually for us, only small sizes, so they're just not available. These are available. And some of the advantages, they're typically, because they're so heavy, they're grown within a regional distance from us. A lot of the plants in this part of the state come from McMinnville, Tennessee, so that's like 3.5 hours or so from here. They have to follow the American standards for nursery stock. Those standards that are outlined when they dig them, how much root mass you're getting, and how they're all put together. You can get much larger plants that way, but there's some big disadvantages to this too. That root mass is only a small portion of the whole root mass that is at the nursery. So you're getting less than 50% of the roots whenever you buy a ball of burlap. And that means that your tree is stressed from the day one, right? As soon as they cut it up out of the nursery and they've severed a good portion, 50% or maybe more of the root system, it's under stress. So there's some things that you're going to have to make sure you do. You can't just plant it and forget it. You've got to take care of this tree to get it to grow and do well. They're very, very heavy to mess with, and they can be pretty expensive too, because there's a lot of labor, there's a lot of shipping and things to get things. Container, you would think might be the silver bullet here. We're going to solve all the problems with just buy container trees. And they do have some great advantages. You can put them in the ground any time of the year. They're pretty easy to get around. They come in a lot of different sizes, but they have a big problem with getting pot down and circling roots. And a lot of work's been done in the nursery industry, with copper line pots and other things to try to keep these roots from doing that. But the longer they're in these containers, the more likely they're going to do it. And what we're talking about are roots that come off of the tree, they head out toward the edge, there's a plastic barrier, so they turn, and then they go around and around. If you haven't seen it with trees, I'm sure you've seen it with perennials, end of the season perennial sales at box stores, and you pop them out, and there's just massive amounts of roots. So we have to address that before we put those in the ground. So when we're thinking about our plant material, try to remember these three things: roots, injury, and form, and correcting some of those when you get ready to plant them. So looking at the roots, if you take it off of the burlap, or you pull it out of a pot, you want to start by cutting any of the torn or ragged roots. You're going to try to find the trunk flare. This is a big one. We had a specialist, when done well, and he's retired now, and they haven't replaced his position yet. But I remember making 3 visits in one day, and the issue that I kept seeing is that every tree that I was looking at was too deep in the landscape. It was planted too deep. So I called him after the 3rd one. I said, I'm missing the mark. I don't know what's wrong, but every tree I'm looking at, I'm telling him it's too deep. And he goes, that's fact, that there are too deep. And it's not necessarily the homeowner's problem. It's getting them from the nursery too deep. So part of the process in the nursery, before they dig a ball and burlap plant, is they run through and add more soil up over the weeds to kill out the weeds. And so soil can be added up to as much as 6 inches around the trunk of those plants. And then they dig it, and then they put it up in the burlap, and then they ship it out, and you plant it, and you take it and look at the burlap and say, well, that's the right depth. I'm going to put it at the same depth that it came from the nursery, because somewhere in history we learned that you plant them at the same depth. But that would be a mistake. You've got to remove that and find what we call the flare. So this is trunk, and this is root, and this is the flare. This has to be right at the surface of the ground, or even slightly above it, up to 1 inch above the surface of the ground. And if we make that mistake and plant it too deep in the soil, it's dead. It's not going to survive. And probably out of the site visits that I make that aren't an insect or a disease, that are just abiotic, this is number 1. We see this the most. So that's your take-home message. If you don't learn anything else tonight, look for the flare when you go to plant that plant. When we're, if you're buying a big old ball and burlap, you want a good amount of root system for that plant. So there's some guidelines for that. But also twisting and circling roots in the container, you can cut those. When people are worried about cutting roots, you can do that. It will not hurt the plant. It'll certainly hurt it a lot less if you cut it now than if you plant it like it is in this bottom picture and leave it in the landscape. That's going to end up as a dead tree in the future. So you have to do the hard thing now. And we'll talk about pruning in a minute. I'll show you some other hard things that people just don't want to do. But if you do it when it's young, the tree will quickly recover, and you can avoid a lot of future problems. This just shows how you would do that, cutting down the side or cutting across the bottom. Really just get those roots teased, cut them apart. I've even gone so far as to, not in a container, but in a ball and burlap, of spraying all of the dirt off of the root system. I couldn't find the flare. It was this deep in the root ball. So I took a garden hose and made it a bare root tree of my own, and then I planted it so that I could fix those issues. I was worried it was going to kill it. That's another example of some girdling roots right at the surface there that could have been taken care of, and the plant would have survived, but it didn't. Look for injuries. You know how they sell in some stores those little paper sleeves that go over the trunk of the tree? Lift it up or look under it, or even if you have to, people are always worried about taking plants out of the pot in the nursery, that somebody's going to get upset because you spilled some potting soil on the ground. Take it out to your car, then look at it and say, well, this is a mess. Take it back in and return it or something, because you need to make sure you don't go home with that thing. Same thing goes for the trunk. Look to see if it has wounds, damage on the trunk, and make sure it's not covered. I don't think they're doing it maliciously, but you just want to be able to look under there to make sure there's not issues like this. And then check and make sure that the overall form of the plant looks good. You're looking, we talked about that, we're talking about branch attachment. So the one on the left is a good branch attachment. You've got the trunk and the limb coming off, and you get this little ridge of material. That's called a branch bark ridge. You have one on your hand. If you hold your hand up and your thumb out like this, okay? You're looking for that little wrinkly spot right there. You want to see that on trees as much as possible. When trees are like this and there's no wrinkly spot, that's what you got on the other. And that's going to break eventually. That's going to get a weight load or a wind load, and it's going to twist off the tree. You've seen bracket pears? They are made up almost exclusively of this thing on the right. That's their biggest flaw, right? Fast growing, maybe some might even say they're pretty. I think they stink a little bit, but they have this major flaw, and that's why they're not a great choice. And we don't recommend them. All right, let's walk through planting. So we've kind of already alluded to looking for the flare. So here's a root ball that had to be removed back to get to that flare. And you can see, which is a good point, and you can see kind of the discoloration. It wasn't quite as deep as some others, but it was over an inch, maybe 2 inches above the root system, right? So it's a good thing that they took the moment and they moved this soil back. Now we know how deep. We did this first before we even dug the hole. So you do that first, set it down, rake that stuff off of there so you can figure out, because, is that nice looking good? Yeah, when you go to plant your planting hole, you don't want it to go any deeper than the container size or the burlap, bulk and burlap size. It needs to be the right depth. If it's too deep and you go to set it in, you may be putting it down deeper yourself. And even if you realize that at that time, it's really hard to recompact that soil. So you can put soil back in it, but you need to get in the hole and jump up and down and really compact that so it's got a firm place for the root ball to sit. Otherwise, in time, it's going to settle. And when it settles, it's going to sink, right? So we're trying to avoid that problem. You want a saucer size shaped hole that's wider at the top and narrower at the bottom and slopes down. And well, that's about it. There's not much else to it. But getting the depth right, spread it out. A big question about removing on ball and burlap and the wire. What do you do? What do you all typically do? Anybody find a tree? I should
Cutting everything off, cutting it off.
When it's possible, that's the recommendation. There has been some guidelines, and I don't know if they're any of our clubs or not, but that at least remove the top third and you can leave the bottom piece. But newer information about that wire where tests they've done where they stuck wire in the soil, just stick it in the soil and let it sit there for a time period. If it's galvanized wire baskets, it's not breaking down, it's still there. And eventually your roots are going to get into those mesh, those blocks in the wire. So take it off at all costs. The only time I'd say to be careful about that is if the nursery happened to dig it while it was too dry. And if you go to take it, put it in your landscape, and you start opening and the root ball, the root mass starts coming apart, it's cracking and falling and big pieces are coming apart, stop. Put it back in the soil that way because you're probably going to break a lot of roots if you keep going. Or you can hose it all off and plant bare root. That's a little trickier. Put the tree in place. If the tree's in a container, make sure you take it out of the container, as I said before. And then make sure that it's upright, and you need to walk around and look at it from different directions. You can stand right here and think, that looks great, and then walk over there and think, I don't know what's thinking. We've talked about this already, but getting all the twine and the string and all those things on. If you do leave burlap on it, make sure it's all below grade, that it's not sticking up out of the soil, because if burlap is sticking up out of the soil in a hot day, it'll act like a wick. It'll pull moisture away from your root ball and out and evaporate. So you want it down or trim it off or whatever needs to be done. And then backfill. This is another place we can get caught because we do have a clay type soil. When you dig that hole, even if you dig a nice wide hole and slope it down, you're digging probably in clay soil, I'm guessing. And so clay soil is also what they make clay pots out of, right? And so if you go and put peat moss and potting mix back in that hole, you've created a nice wide-based flower pot in the ground. And that's not going to be great for your plant. So we only recommend putting the exact same stuff, that awful stuff that came out, put that right back into the soil. Also, roughing up along the edges of the root ball can be helpful if you're digging and it's a little bit wet and you're glazing the sides. Does that make sense? It can make it a smooth edge on the inside of the hole. Just take that spade and stab it around there and make some divots in it so that the roots have a place to go. Otherwise, they could hit that clay and start turning inside. Another thing that I do whenever I put the soil back in, because of dirt clods and things that maybe not broke up all the way when you go to put it back in the ground, everything is all mudding in. So you just put a little, it's not technical. You just throw some dirt in there and wet it down and let the water start to get all the air pockets out, and then add a little bit more soil and work your way up that way. That takes care of having big air pockets, which can later, well, not even later, same season, I've seen it. You'll have these voids around, so the soil starts to shrink a little bit, and I've gone, unfortunately I did it at our landscape with the project we just finished, and there was some shrubs dying, and I took the soil probe, and there's a big hole right here, so that's why it's dying. There was no hole, there was no backfill, not enough backfill around the roots to get out. Staking, should we stake, should we not stake? In most cases, you don't need to stake. The only time you would need to do that is if you have a really windy area, you have a slope, then you might consider staking. If you're going to stake, this is a really good product. This is called arbor tie. It's a nice wide nylon material, and it does break down in the sun over time because typically people forget. This is the worst case way that you could do it is putting a piece of wire inside of a garden hose. That's not a great idea. Don't do that. If you don't have arbor tie, you're not going to buy a roll of that. If you've got old T-shirts, rip them in long strips and use that and tie that to your stake. That would be better than putting wire inside. And the other big thing is that you've got to go back and take those off. 1 season is all that's recommended. 1 year. Then take it down. If it hasn't established and gotten its roots out to be able to hold itself up in a year, then we can extend that, but typically that won't be a problem.
Do you recommend shaking and beating them? Like I'll go out with all mine on a first year and just shake the hell out of them every now and then.
The trees?
Yeah, so that they grow up straight. That's what I was taught, a wives' tale. I don't know.
Gotcha. Okay. I can see that for, part of the reason of staking, and I'm glad you brought that up too, you should be able to move that tree around. Sometimes we put stakes on so tight that it can't develop the taper that it needs, that flare, because part of that taper is formed when the tree is moving around. I'm not sure if that's causing it to grow fast taper or not, by vigorous shaking, but still it needs to be loose enough to move back and forth in the landscape. Don't tie it up so tight. And then watering. It's going to need lots of water. And I know sometimes that's the hardest part of all of this, is keeping things watered. I've got a little bit more on watering. I'll get to that in just a second. But that's a crucial part. Mulching. What can I say about mulching? We recommend 1 to 3 inches, up to 4, maybe at the very most. Are you familiar with the term volcano mulching? You are? Okay, so that's just something master gardeners like to poke fun at people for doing. It's when you take a whole bag of mulch, 3 cubic feet, and you dump it around one tree and mounds all the way up. We don't recommend that. It holds moisture against the trunk, gives a great place for voles, which are kind of like a field mouse, to live in there in the winter and eat all the bark off of your tree. Don't do that. Spread that out over a wider area. The wider the better. I don't know if you're going to do this, but that's great. That tree likes that, right? So you get it the wider as you can, or what makes sense in your landscape. When's the best time to do planting? Well, for us, fall is the best time. It drives me insane that our Arbor Day is in April. But we still do Tree Week. I don't know if you guys do Tree Week yet? Yep, great. So Tree Week is in October, and so we're pushing that message, at least in Christian County and in this county, trying to get people to think trees in the fall, not in the spring. Of course, we know why they do that. We don't have a lot of nurseries in this area, so the garden centers get all their stuff in the spring. That's when the plants are available. So it would be great if they would get some in the fall, but if they don't sell them, they got to overwinter them, so that's not going to happen. Why do we do that? Because the roots can still grow at lower temperatures than the shoots, and because we know that planting a tree in the landscape, it's called transplanting, adds stress to a tree or a shrub, or any plant for that matter, then it's great when it's going into a dormancy period for the top part, because the roots are still growing, and they can still get to the moisture, they can still get established, and they'll grow for a long period of time. Anymore, we don't even have really cold weather until after December. So you've got all that time for these things to keep growing. They'll keep growing until the soil is frozen. And the exception to this might be if you're planting some evergreens, especially evergreen magnolias, which oddly enough is a zone 7. So we got some stipulations already. We're a zone 7, but we're told we are zone 7, but we got a tree that kind of struggles with that. That's a red flag to me. Rhododendrons, crepe myrtles, also there are some crepe myrtles, recent introductions. I don't know how recent, from the U.S. Arboretum, Botanical Garden, what's it called? Arboretum or Botanical Garden, that are hardy up to zone 5, but a lot of the ones that you find around here are really zone 7 plants. That's why when we have a really cold winter, all the tops die back. The roots are hardy, but the tops die back. Those need to probably be planted in the spring, just to give them more time for the roots to get established. Mistakes to avoid. So we talked about the best way to do it. These are the mistakes that people made. Again, the #1 problem is that we plant it too deep. add soil amendments back into the hole, don't add any soil amendments to the hole. Add fertilizer or planting, you don't need to do that. Generally speaking, you rarely need to fertilize trees anyways. Especially if they're in your lawn or your landscape and you're already fertilizing those, you don't need to specially fertilize your trees, they're getting what they need. There are situations where you need to do that. Don't over mulch, prune to balance, that's something we don't recommend. So kind of another school of thought is, well, we don't have much root system, so I need to cut back as much of this top to get it into balance. Don't do that. The tree will naturally balance itself out. You may have some dead tips, dead branches, but that's the tree getting into balance. You may be pruning the wrong branch that it needed for balance, so you don't want to do that. And then leaving grass solid around the tree or even putting it back, that's high competition for those young trees, right? Get that grass out of there and put a nice 2 to 4 inch layer of mulch around it and your tree will be. We'll skip this part, but sometimes I get questions about, well, I want to move this tree to, you know, to another spot, or I'm moving and I want to take my tree with me. Can I just go out and dig it up? No, you cannot just go out and dig it up. It's probably not going to make it. Probably not. I've seen people take backhoes and pick up a tree and go put it in the ground and it lives. So I don't know. But these are the guidelines. So we won't go into depth, but this is how much work it takes to get that tree into a ball of burlap. You're probably not going to do that. If it's just across the yard, you wouldn't go to this much extreme. You would probably try to get that much root ball out, put it on a big old tarp and drag it, put it back in the hole. You can try it, but it's a lot of work to be able to get that. Take a look at this Japanese maple, how much root mass they try to take with that tree. Yes?
What's your definition of late fall? Because it's like, you know, like, that's where I'm always confused too around here specifically. Like,
Yeah.
does that mean like November,
We're going to do most
Thanksgiving?
of our tree planting in October, November, and even December until the ground freezes. You can still do that.
So you, like the day before the frost and the ground freezes, you can be
Yeah.
all right.
Because even when the temperatures are really, in December, it's hit and miss. It might be 70 degrees in December anymore. But the ground doesn't freeze. I mean, generally, this year I'll be made a liar, but usually it doesn't freeze until we get to January or so. So December, keep planting. There's some smaller ones. You might be able to pull that off if you've got a boxwood or something you need to move, or a small shrub, tying up those branches and digging a smaller root ball. You don't have to go to that extent. But that's just an example of how it works. So I mentioned fertilizer. Why would you need to fertilize trees, especially when they're young? You might be fertilizing, and we'll lump pH into that as well, the pH level of your soils. If you take a soil test and then you see that you have a pH that's really out of whack for trees, and it would take a while for it to get, trees are pretty forgiving when it comes to pH. When you get to soils, if you're not familiar with pH, you'll learn more about that range, but 7's in the middle. Most trees are going to be somewhere in 6.5 up to maybe 7.5. It's the middle, that's where you want to be. Unless you're a rhododendron or an azalea, and then you want to go way over here at like 5. So if your soil is off, that might be a time where you need to make some adjustments, even before planting, to get those soils right. If you've planted after or during construction around a property and you have damage to the tree, this would be a time that you could fertilize to try to help it overcome some of that damage. This is a little bit different than what we say, like if you have a tree that has a disease or an insect issue, we don't recommend following it back up with fertilizer, okay, because that tree is stressed for a different reason. Here, the tree's healthy, it just has damage, construction damage or something else, windstorm, that's not familiar, those types of things, and you need that tree to close those wounds quickly, then adding fertilizer for that tree can make sense in those situations. Sometimes we don't have enough soil volume, so here think about a site where, you know, you've got a bed that's maybe 10 foot wide, about 10 foot wide, and then it's got a circle driveway all around it, and then the road out beyond that. There's not a lot of soil volume, it's probably not mining the soil and getting all the nutrients that it needs, so you may have to be proactive in giving additional nutrients to that. What about trees in decline? Well, that's a big question mark. There are some arborists that do injections, so if you've got a tree that's getting thinner, you're seeing more sky than you're seeing leaves when you stand under it, they can come in and do like a Mauger system where they inject fertilizers into the tree, and a lot of times you can see a rapid response. All new growth, the tree starts to fill back in, so there are some times when that can be helpful, but it has to be identified, like what's causing it to be in decline. It's probably not just that it's low in nutrients, it's probably other things that are a problem. And of course, there's some issues with over-fertilizing. In our area, phosphorus is plentiful, so we don't recommend adding any phosphorus because it always runs off into the river, and then we have algae growth, and we have all these other issues, and maybe it's similar here, I don't know for you guys, but be aware of your area and how much nutrients is generally available in your soil. Okay, maybe we'll go faster than that. Okay, how much should you apply? No more than 3 pounds of fertilizer per 1,000 square feet if you have turf, which is kind of the recommendation if you have turf already for how much fertilizer to put on in the fall. And generally no more than 4 pounds per year. The timing for that would be late fall. Again, turf follows the same guidelines for that. And that will help encourage root growth in the wintertime. And you would think, well, spring makes more sense. That's when all the new growth comes out. Fall, we want root growth. We aren't worried about leaf growth. If we got good root growth, we'll have good leaf growth. So target that time. As long as the ground's not frozen, and really the big reason for that is if the ground's frozen, the fertilizer is going to run off in the snow melt, so don't do that. Where do you put it? We don't put it against the tree. We don't put it up against the trunk of the tree. We put it out on the drip line. So I don't know if that's a new term to you or not, but drip line is the outer tips of the branches, okay? Walking around underneath your tree, it may not be a complete circle or a perfect circle. It may be really odd shape, but that's the drip line. That is where the fine feeder roots are located, okay? So those are the roots that are going to be taking up the nutrients. So you want to fertilize out in that zone, not up against the tree. Same thing applies for watering as well. There's a lot of things that we need to consider. We need to get a little bit faster for you guys. One of the factors that I like to make you aware of is if you haven't been to our UK weather website, anybody familiar? We have one of those, or don't we have one? We also have a UK weather app. It's called something. Storm, or what's it called? Weather alert. That's pretty generic. Okay, yeah, you can go to weather alert. UK has their own meteorologist, an ag meteorologist, which includes you guys too, and he tracks all this stuff. Well, that department tracks all this stuff. And if you geek out on weather and temperatures and historical weather, it's all there. And you can go and explore all of that. But something that he talks about, and farmers follow a lot, and I think it applies to our trees as well, is this evapotranspiration rates. And you can go and put in your community, you can see what that rate has been for the last whatever. So we're in a drought now, this is a great time to check that. And what that's telling you is some data that looks like this, which looks a little overwhelming, but let's break it down real quick. So there's some dates between October the 6th down to October the 28th in Christian County. And the second column is the evapotranspiration. So every one of those days, that's how much water is being lost out of the leaves or needles of your plants, okay? It's not a lot, right? But look at the third column over, that's the accumulation. So over that time period of almost a little over 20 days, that tree used 2.16 or evaporated 2.16 inches of water out of that tree. That's okay, so long as we are getting adequate rainfall to supplement that. And in this case, no rain, no rain, no rain, no rain, no rain. 27th and 28th added up to 0.38 of an inch cumulative. So that means we had a deficit of 1.78 inches of water that tree was short on. I'm sure it's worse right now. If I was to pull that data for the last 2 weeks, it's probably a lot worse because we haven't seen a drop of rain and the temperatures have been higher, so we're going to have a lot more evaporation. What that tells you is you have to sometimes irrigate. And if it's a young tree, it's crucial. You've got to get that water. A young tree, I'm saying less than 7 years old. If it's older than that, it's been healthy, it's probably okay. You don't necessarily have to irrigate that. So if you just planted a tree, that should be a given. I think anybody, even people who haven't been to the Master Garden course would know, I need to water my new tree. It's not going to make it, right? But some things that will help: using organic mulch and irrigating during the first season, at least 50% of that rate. So we were showing that we were short 1.7 something, if I forgot. So if we got a half inch of water on during that time period, that's half of that rate, then we've saved that plant. So it doesn't have to be the full replacement. It just has to be part of that, right? That's an acceptable loss or an acceptable gain, either way you want to look at it, as long as we're doing that. And the only way you're going to know that is if you go check out that cool weather out, right? And there's nothing about it. What about big trees? Is that necessary? Well, I just said as long as it's over 7, it's probably fine, but there was some research done on established oak trees, and they found over an extended, this was a much longer than 2-week drought, this was a several-month drought, but they did find by irrigating in the drip zone outside the drip line of the tree, that those oak trees did better. They didn't have as much dieback in the crown, and overall they were healthier. It's pretty obvious information, I guess, but it just kind of reinforces the idea that even older trees can benefit from getting some additional water. How do you do it and do it correctly? The things to avoid: frequent shallow irrigation, not a good idea. That's just sprinkling. Like going out with the garden hose this afternoon and sprinkling around your tree, you didn't do anything, right? You didn't really help it at all. It needs to get down into the soil. But don't overdo it. Don't flood it, because then you're going to make your soils anaerobic. There'll be no oxygen in there. You'll have root loss. So there's a balance. It's not that hard. You can get there. Also, if you overdo it, you're going to have more root diseases and those types of things, and you may push out, leach out all of the nutrients, especially if you just fertilize. Avoid this option. This is not a great option. This is just overhead irrigation. It's not really good for maybe lawns. If you do it early in the morning, that's about it, right? Otherwise, you're just encouraging disease. You're getting all the leaves wet. The roots are what need it, not the leaves. This is good. It's cheap. It's easy. You need to make sure you're not trying to do this on a slope with a Lowe's bucket and all the water's rolling down. That's not going to work. I guess you could go uphill about 5 feet and let it roll down to the tree. So that could be an issue. It can cause erosion. But this picture is a red flag. Should be a red flag to you based on what we've been talking about. Is this a newly planted tree? Where's the drip line? Where's the roots at? They're way out here, right? So we're doing nothing. When you water a big old tree and you water the trunk there, nothing. There's nothing there to even absorb the water. It's just anchoring roots at that stage. So you got to go out further. If it's a newly planted tree, you can use the one we just saw, or you can get some of these commercial water bags, gator bags they're called. You fill like a 5-gallon bucket inside one of those, and it has these little small emitters, and it slowly drips the water into the soil, and that'll extend your time. You don't have to go out there and water as frequently, especially during the drought. If it's a bigger tree, soaker hoses are great. Soaker hoses, you wrap them around a couple times, depending on the size of your drip line, turn the water on, let it soak into that ground maybe overnight, and let it really get a good drenching. That can be great. It's not great if you have squirrels. For some reason, they love to chew these things up, but they can be helpful. Mulch is also helpful. So go back to that great big mulch ring. Probably not going to do it. I know it's too much mulch in the yard, but that really helps because it does lots of other things. But just thinking about moisture, it helps conserve the moisture and increase the infiltration rate, which is just a fancy way of saying if the mulch is wet, eventually it's going to release some of that moisture into your root zone. So you've got like a backup water system with mulch. So if you're not mulching around your trees, that's the first thing you can do to help them during periods of drought, is getting additional water. I like organic mulch just because it breaks down and it adds organic matter to the soil. Rock around tree, it's okay. It's going to help with weed control. It's not going to hold the moisture in the rock, obviously, but it will help hold the moisture to the soil. So there's some benefits to that. And I know that it's a little more expensive up front, but you don't have to do it every year, so I can see the reasons why people do that. How much? 1 to 4 inches deep. More is better. You're not going to know if it's 1 to 4 inches unless you take something, a screwdriver or something, and dig around in that soil and make sure it's getting that deep into the soil. Oh, sorry, let me go back. I don't think that's what I meant to say. This is about the mulch, 1 to 4 inches. But the same difference for the soil moisture too. You want it to penetrate down into the root zone, not right on the surface. And when I was leaving, it said more is better, or wider is better. I thought that doesn't make sense for water. What about soil amendments? The research on this says that if you have good loose soil, there's no real benefits to adding organic matter to your soil. You've already got good drained soil. There's not much to be gained. But if you have a hard, compacted clay soil, like we do, and you can work that organic matter into a wider planting area for those roots to go out into, that's good. Do that if you can. So the goal is 1 to 2 inches of water per week. That's about 2 gallons of water 3 times a week. Drip irrigation is the most effective. Mulch is the key to keeping it there. We're going to skip this part. I think you've already done it anyways, and we're running on time.
What is, so like, an inch of water, what, 2 gallons, how long are you applying that 2 gallons over? An hour? 2
So
hours?
if you're not pouring it on, if you're gonna
Mhm.
soak it in, that's called calibration. Nobody ever wants to do that, but that's called taking your soaker hose and putting it in a big old pail or something and turning it on for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, something that you can use to calculate, and then measuring how much water you collected, and then doing the math to figure that out. But same thing if you, which we don't recommend, but if you're doing a irrigation head back and forth, or let's just switch it to a lawn, how much water are you really putting in down? You've got to put little canisters out and collect that, and then measure to see over a time period. So you need to know your time and the depth of water. That's the only way you know for sure if you're putting down enough. The other option is if you're using a bucket and you're going to pour it out on a small tree, you can just measure the bucket. You know about how much it's putting down.
But like, it's gonna all run off the top if you just dump that gallon on.
At
So
one
like,
time, sure. Just go slow. Just let it soak down in the soil.
but how so? Like, can you dig down, should you dig down in, how far should an inch get down into the soil? Like, if you know, oh, okay, my drip line is dripping out, in 30 minutes drips out an inch,
Yeah.
but in that 30-minute time frame, is that too fast for it to soak in?
Yeah, you will have to dig out. You'll have to dig and look and see is it getting down where it's going to go. Otherwise, it's just pulling up and running off.
Yeah, absolutely. So like, an inch should get, you want it to get down 2 inches, like an inch of water should get down 2 inches, 3 inches?
Ideally, you would, but was the soil amended? Is this your existing tree and it's hard, compacted clay soil? It may take longer or
Right.
more.
You should have to test your trees.
It has every tree's, every site may be slightly different. It's the downside of that. That's why there's not like a 7,
Right.
42, or whatever. I can't give you an actual answer because it's going to vary. All right, skip. It's a shame you don't have time, because this was the best part of the whole program. We'll point out this book, if you don't have that. Did y'all talk about this book last week? This is cheap. It's less than $5 on Amazon. It's $4.95, less than $5, just barely. It's a great little key for identifying trees in your landscape. So that's typically what I do on that section, but that adds a lot of time. And I think we need to talk some more about pruning instead. At least I have a request for that, so we're going to get to pruning instead. That's what you see in the book. It sort of walks you through.
Is it according to zone or area, or do you have to get one for northeast, south, you know?
This will cover our area. The tree finder is for, I thought it was the United States, but it's for the United States. Every tree that I've tried to identify, except for especially ornamental type trees, will be in there. Mostly native trees. I went and cut these, so I have to tell you this to make sure, but you'll get to this. Is that next week, or you did it already? Plan ID, opposite and alternate, did y'all cover that? See, I said it was a big section. Okay, here's some websites that will be in this little QR code at the end that you can take a picture, and these are some links to help you look. But basically, we're just looking at some books. That one that I just showed you is called Tree Finder. Also, this book, Peterson Field Guide, Trees and Shrubs, is a good one. And then there's some websites that you can go and check out. Tennessee has a good one on vascular plants that you can kind of key and go through those as well. Or this, how many have this app? Naturalist or Seek? Yeah. I don't know, it might put extension agents out of a job, at least in some aspect of our job.
Probably not.
People come in the office now, and I just walk up and they're like, do you know what this is? Yes, I do. Give me a second. Oh, yellow foxtail, what do you know? You should get rid of that. That's a weed. So it's really great, and it's fun. If you've got kids, my son and I go out in the field and we'll take the Seek app, and it's like a game, so you get to get badges. It's called dopamine hits, and it's a lot of fun. So I encourage you to get addicted. I mean, try it out. Just a few woody plant issues related to what we've talked about so far. So here's a pH issue. This is a pin oak tree. You guys grow pin oaks? I see this one pretty frequently where the whole pin oak tree is bright yellow. Pin oak trees are supposed to be green, not bright yellow. And that is a pH issue. It's labeled as an iron deficiency issue. The issue truly is that there's plenty of iron in the soil, but the pH, that range we talked about, is way off. And because it's way off, it can't absorb any of this iron. It's just sitting there with it. And so you've got to adjust that pH. We've stopped recommending pin oaks too because of this little guy. You don't have this one? This is an insect. We're not talking about insects.
Mhm.
This is oak gall. Okay, so it's a little tiny wasp that lays its eggs inside the stem, and then thousands of these things emerge, and eventually your tree starts to lose its branches and dies back. So pin oak, it's off of my list anyways. I know it's still a pretty tree. Swamp white oak doesn't get that problem. It also doesn't have an iron deficiency issue, so maybe consider that one. Rhododendrons can do it too. You can tell it's a nutritional issue when you get these greenish veins and yellow in between the veins. That's a good clue that this is not a disease problem. This is a nutritional problem. We should have learned this already, right? We got, make sure those plant tags are removed. And I don't know, I see this mostly when I go like through a box store or a fast food place, and the landscapers put all the stakes on the trees, and then they're going to another job, and nobody there knows to go. I went and let our Chick-fil-A know, because I didn't want anything to happen to Chick-fil-A. So they took all theirs down. Oh, you can't really see that very well, but that's herbicide damage, so some people don't want to mulch, and they don't want to trim, so just spray it. And that can cause some real issues, especially with maple trees. Maple trees and glyphosate, which is Roundup, don't mix. You get some dieback immediately in maple trees, even bigger maple trees, if too much of it is applied and gets on the root system. So go with mulch. This is maybe considered a problem. I don't know, I put a big question mark after that. This is surface roots, and people want to know if they can put more dirt over that. Can I cover that? No, it's just gonna come back up again. Plus, doesn't that look kind of cool? I don't know. Just either mulch it or stop trying to mow that section. There's no grass there. Get away from it. Leave it alone. Tremor damage. Okay, you didn't use the Roundup and you didn't put much mulch up around it, and so now you hit it with the string trimmer, right? We don't want to do that. That's a real issue to the canyon layer, and we've already covered botany, but I brought my baby tree cookie, so I'm going to give you a spiel real quick anyways. This has got a thick one. This is some sort of pine, but if we damage this thin line, right, the thin brown line, if we start to damage too much of that, we cut off the flow of water from the roots to the canopy. And that is one of the biggest reasons why that happens, is we get too close with the string trimmer. And on the really young trees, really thin bark trees, like a maple, for example, if you get too close and it's a small, newly planted tree, that string will go, and it's cut completely around, complete circle. So that's not a good thing. You need some mulch on those trees. This tree, I'm sure they wanted to keep because it was a big, nice, mature tree in front of their house, but all of this construction, all the grade changes, and now we've got a dead tree that has to be addressed, right? Trees cannot have more than 3 inches max graded off around it. Existing trees on a landscape, if you start grading and move more than 3 inches off of the root system, you'll have problems like this. Probably even less than that, but that's where the line is for grading issues. Let me go back. So if you have to do that, then we need to think about other processes. You may have to get a professional involved, but you can do things like terracing, where you carve out a section and grade up here, and then it drops down, and then you can protect more of the root system that way. White pine decline, do you guys deal with that? Yeah. If you plant 10 pine trees, in about 3 years, 2 of them will be dead, and then another 4 or 5 years, you'll lose about 5 of those trees, and they just decline. And it's kind of a combination of a lot of things, environmental, and other stressors, and they don't actually have a real good reason for why it happens. It just happens. So white pines, okay, I wouldn't plant a whole row of them, right? Just 1 or 2, and I think that'd be okay. Can't affect this one, but this was a big deal just a couple years ago, late spring frost and sudden drops in temperatures. And of course, it looks like it destroyed all the foliage, which it did, but really if you dig down inside and look at the stems, that's where the problem happened, right? All the stems split open because there was moisture flowing, big old hard frost, it froze, and then it split back open, and now we've got boxwoods and cherry laurels and nandinas and other things this last round that had to do with this. This is one you can do something about, and I see it often. So this is sun skull. Another name for it is southwest trunk injury. And what we're talking about is during the wintertime, on a young tree, less than 3 years in age, with thin bark. So again, I'll just stick with maple. Maple tree, and this side of the tree faces south or southwest, somewhere in that zone, right? In the wintertime, the tree's dormant, the ground's frozen, the roots are dormant, and the sun comes out on one of our Kentucky winter days and it heats up outside. Everything's getting warm and you think, oh, spring, it's only February. That's a problem because now the sun is hitting that side of the tree and all of that cell material on that side is going, let's go, we gotta grow, we need water. And the roots are dormant, there's no water to give, and so it causes a cankerous, and it will cause this very big wound that will always be there. So you can avoid it for about $4.95 with one of these rolls right here that you can get at any store or online, and they got other things too. So at planting, go to the tree, and during the wintertime, and just wrap this around, not super tight, but just so the wind doesn't blow it off. You go all the way up to the first scaffoldings, the first limbs on the tree. And then when spring actually gets here, take it off, put it in the garden shed, and break it back out next year. 3 years, maybe only 2. The other option is to take a bucket of white paint and dip it in with some water and paint the trunks, but that's a lot more permanent. I don't really go for that. But that's your 2 options on how to keep that from happening to your trees. Pruning. Why do we prune? Well, there's a few reasons we have to do that. Let me check the time real quick. 6:06. We're going to make it. Sometimes we have to prune because of health issues. We're going to get rid of dead, damaged, and diseased tissues. If we have limbs that have gotten a lot of, maybe some sort of a disease and all the branches dead, it's a good idea to go ahead and prune that off. If you can reach it, you can remove it because it will fall off over time. But the tree has to put a lot of resources into the part where that dead limb connects to the tree to get it to close off and eventually drop that limb off. And if it leaves a stub or something else, there's an opportunity for decay. So dead limbs, prune those out if it's within range where you can get to it. Misshapen, crowded, rubbing branches, that's basic pruning 101, right? How do I start on pruning this shrub? Where do I look for first? You take out the dead first, then you look for branches that are rubbing up against each other. Let's go back to our crepe myrtle example. This is a good one for red. It only needs 3, we always do things in odd numbers, 3, 5, or 7 trunks coming up from the base, right? You've got 14 coming up, that's too many trunks. So take out some of those, and then look at some of the branches that may have crossed, and they're just doing this because they're going to wear a wound on both sides, right? So one or both of those need to come out. Sometimes we prune to increase flowers or fruit. That's especially true with fruit trees. We might need to change the plant's appearance, as in with hedges, those types of things. Occasionally, we have some shrubs that could really benefit from rejuvenation pruning. So there's 2 types of that. If you have something like a forsythia, good old-fashioned yellow blooming forsythia plant, those are a type that after it blooms, you can go to this far to the ground and just chop it straight off, right? And it'll come back out, it'll be pretty next year and have new growth, and it'll look a lot better because it may have gotten massive and it just is out of control. So you can do that. Not every plant can do that. Other plants can even do rejuvenation, where you take out maybe 1/3 of the branches at a time and work your way back until you have a whole, after 3 years, if you're cutting a tree every year, you got a brand new shrub in 3 years, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit more. And directing growth. This can happen too for young trees especially, where the leader gets broken. And what do you do in that situation? Because now you've got a tree that grows up and it's forked like this. You don't want to leave that because this is going to be a point in the future where damage can occur if the tree gets split. So you need to retrain that leader. So here is the leader before. We're going to grab this branch, we're going to chop this off, and then we're going to take this side branch and we're going to bend it up and tie it off with that arbor tie or a t-shirt and hold it there for a season. And if you do that, over time, it will replace it. Then you can go back and remove the rest of the stuff and you've got a brand new leader. It's very effective on younger trees. Bigger trees, that's not going to work. But on small trees, that's how you repair a leader. Timing on pruning. People really get hung up on this sometimes about, well, I'm pruning the wrong time of the year. There's really only one wrong time of the year, and we're in it right now. Drought stress, late summer, this is the time we don't prune. The reason for that is if we're pruning, we're adding more stress. Every time you prune, you add more stress. Also, if this was a wet summer and we were pruning, it may not be as much stress related to but it's going to cause that plant to put out new growth. And here in about 2 months, maybe, we should have frost, right? We got September and October, we should have a frost. That new growth is gonna have enough time to get ready for winter, and it's gonna die back. Probably won't kill your plant, but you're gonna have more pruning to have to do, so that's the time we avoid. So your first choice is late winter to early spring, before the buds swell, but when the temperatures are above 20 degrees. Second choice then would be early summer after foliage has matured. If you're just pruning a little branch here or there, anytime is fine. That's not gonna cause any major damage. And then those are some other relative things related on what times to avoid. Some of the tools, and I brought some that I use, really you just need these three things. The pair of loppers. These are bypass pruners, so that means you have the handle and you have the blade, and the blade goes bypass the handle. The other style that's out there, the blade lands squarely on the handle. We don't really recommend that because this anvil, the branch lays across that, and when the blade comes down, it compresses in on the stem, it can bruise it and make this healing of that branch a little bit difficult. So you need these in a big version, and you need these in a little version, right? There's other options, there's modifications, there's some ratchets and those types of things, but if you get bigger than an inch or so that thing can't cut, then you just need one of these double-toothed pruning saws. Anything bigger than that, you probably just need to get a professional. Although a project we did this week with our master gardeners, I had a lady, a retired school teacher, show up with her mini chainsaw, had the battery in the back, and she popped the blade off, and she said, "Let's go." I'm like, "You can go." So you can try that if you want to, that's fine. Larger limbs, so here we're talking about something you're going to use that pruning saw on, so 2-3 inches and bigger. Make sure that when you prune it, you make sure you know where you're pruning at. And so there's that branch ridge, and you have one with you as well. You're looking for that branch bark ridge right at the top. You want to prune just outside of that. And you can see the dotted line, not the big long dotted line, but the one that's out. That's where you make your cut right there. So that's your pruning cut. And underneath that section, which is sometimes pretty easy to see on trees, and other times you'll never see it. It's called the branch collar. It's underneath the branch. You're trying to get a cut between about a ½ inch or so from the branch bark ridge and just on the edge of the branch collar. If you do that, it will close up every time, okay? If you prune closer to the tree, you'll have what we call a flush cut, and it will decay. If you prune further out, like the picture shows now, you will get some dieback. You'll have a stub, and it will rot back because it won't be able to close, it won't be able to compartmentalize. So that's what we're shooting for location. And the cut should either be back to its origin. In other words, if you're cutting a branch, go back to the trunk of the tree, or if it's a side branch off of that, back to the bigger portion, or to a side branch that's a ½ of its size. That's not always practical. The ice storm that we had in
Oh, no.
09, yes. Like tops of trees were busted, trees were broken everywhere. We didn't even have side branches to bring back to. So a lot of those trees ultimately just had to be taken down, but that was the goal. And there's a few of the trees that homeowners didn't want to take it down, and so the recommendation was to a branch this size that was broken, and the side branch was this size, so we cut back to that, because that's the only thing we had, and you hope there's enough conductive tissue there to close up that one.
I like how it labels the imaginary one.
Let's see, cuts are made just above a node. You covered that, I think. So there's your cutting angles. Maybe went through all of this stuff. Don't worry too much about trying to get this perfect 45-degree angle. Just don't leave it clear over on stuff. Here's thinning. So here we're talking about going in and thinning and removing individual branches. This works good for spirea, andina, red-twig dogwood as well, versus severe renewal pruning. And not every plant can respond to that, but forsythia can. You can do some severe pruning on that kind of respond. Here's an example with a yellow twig dogwood, and you can see it on the left as before, and over on the right. All they've done is take out the oldest looking canes. And this is an important process anyways for red and yellow twig dogwood. If you want to see that color of those stems, after they get some age on them, they don't do that much anymore. So you've got to continually remove the older branches so that you have the newer growth. here's a tree that's just gotten away, probably suckered out from an old tree, and so they're pruning it down to just a few branches, or a few trunks to grow. Here's another example that's just overgrown. Come in and just remove just a portion of that. So this is all removable. Hedges, we don't really do a whole lot of this, I'm guessing, maybe you do. But if you have boxwoods in a row, how many of you use the hedge shears you go across the top and try to hew them off? Anybody have a boxwood hedge? Some of you do? Okay, yes. There's nothing wrong with that, but what you'll notice over time is if you pull those branches apart, there's no growth down inside, right? It gets bare. Privet is another hedge that's typically pruned that way, and you just prune across the top, and so all your growth is about this deep on the plant, right on the edge, all over the edge of the plant. Another option is this reach in, take out, where you just go to the plant and remove, go back into it, reach down inside and clip it, take that whole branch out. It leaves, it's not, if your look is trying to be a nice, even manicured look, this isn't your method, okay? But if you want it to be more natural and flowing and arching, this is your method. Go in and prune those out, those create little divots for sunlight to get down in there, and you'll have growth all down inside of the plant instead of just on the edge. Both ways are okay. Just saying there's some options. What about flowering trees and plants? If you are concerned about cutting off your flower buds, that would be the only reason this would kick in. You can still prune those based on the first slide about pruning any time other than late summer. But if you want to make sure you don't cut your flower buds off for this year or for next year, then plants that bloom prior to June 1st need to be pruned after that bloom, and if it's before June 1st, then they need to be pruned in winter or early spring. Did I say that right? Plants blooming after June, yes. Because late bloomers are pruned early in the spring because they're setting their flower buds on the current year's growth. Where this falls all apart is if you like hydrangeas. I cannot help you with hydrangeas. I would recommend just go with oak leaf hydrangeas. They don't fuss about anything, they're great. But if you're trying to grow mop heads or others, you need an expert. And I think he told you there's going to be an expert next Tuesday, is that right? So come back on Tuesday to learn about that. Evergreens, I don't know, I've never had a current evergreen before, but they say you can prune back the candles, which is just at the tip of the growth. But don't do this. This is a juniper. One of the things to keep in mind about evergreens, if you prune past the green, that branch is dead. So if this is a big old evergreen shrub, a needled evergreen, not a boxwood, not a broadleaf evergreen, a needled evergreen. So this was too tall, and they went in and gave it a big haircut, and now all of that's dead. And that's not coming back. It doesn't regrow. White pine, same thing. If you have a branch that sticks way out, well, I'm just going to tip this off, and maybe it'll send out some side shoots. It'll never send out a side shoot. It'll just be a big branch. Okay, so this is important. We show the picture similar to this at the bottom, and this is one that needs to be addressed while the tree is young. The older it gets, requires things like cabling and bracing, and high expensive arbor spills, and you don't want to have to get to that stage. But if you have control of it when it's young, you can fix that by doing the hard thing, which is pruning your tree, sometimes in half, to be able to get it to recover. So I had a home visit, and I don't know how to get people's, you can't change people's minds is what I'm trying to say. But we looked at his maple tree, and the tree was growing up, and it was doing this number, which maple trees will do. And he called me out for something else, and he said, you know what, it's not too late. I know it's a big branch, but you should cut off this half of the tree and let it grow up. Then it won't split. And he said, well, how long till it will split? I said, I don't know, maybe 15 years? I'll be done with it. And that was his mentality, and I hate that because somebody else is going to call me later and say, my tree is in trouble. Yeah, it is, because that guy didn't do anything about it. So take care of it when it's young, and you can keep that tree from having breakage issues. Here's an example. So you see over here on this first picture, that little side shoot, that's a codominant leader. He wants to outgrow the main leader. Can't allow that. I know it's hard. It's half of the tree, but it's half of the tree. We're going to take that out. If not, it ends up like this on the right. A couple things will happen. One is, of course, there's a potential for breakage, but also you'll be planting a tree with the expectation of it getting 25 to 30 feet tall, and in 10 years, it's still a small tree. Why is it doing that? Because it's trying to grow 2 leaders. It's not growing the way it's supposed to grow. So
How do you prune, I mean, just standard?
those steps that we just looked at here,
Yeah.
this will be easy. You can come right in there and
Take a lot, or go up it all.
Yeah. Even on know, this, you could still do it in the dormant season. It's big, I can't guarantee that it's gonna compartmentalize and close up, but it's not the best right now, because at time, eventually that could split right there. If not from snow or ice load, just having those two leaders next to each other, when they get some good size to them, they can push each other apart and split up the mountain. Nobody ever wants to do that, so try to catch them in some backstage. Mature trees, the only thing that we would say about that, sometimes you saw that picture at the beginning, that's a special pruning for that tree to go around a power line. But there are some other types of things that we might do sometimes. Crown thinning is a good idea. Sometimes older trees get more and more dead up in the canopy. So having someone come out and getting the dead out of the tree can help refresh your tree, maybe even encourage some new growth in the tree that way, increase light penetration and those types of things. Crown raising can be helpful if you are struggling for clearance underneath, and that typically plays into effect if you're trying to get grass to grow and you've got a lot of big trees, then you can raise up the crown, which is removing the lower branches so that you get more sunlight penetration. Or crown reduction, that's probably going to just be left for utility companies. If they are certified arborist utility specialists, they will prune those back to a side branch, like we talked about with the ice storm example, where there's a branch that shoots out to the side, or all the way back to the origin, and it won't be topped. It'll still look like it's topped because part of the tree is missing up there, but if you look closely, it'll be pruned correctly. It'll have the right location on the branches. That is what we don't want to happen, is topping the trees, because it's not healthy for the trees. It doesn't outright kill them, but it's sure going to help them get there faster. You're going to have a lot of decay up in those areas. You're going to have a ton of sucker growth coming out, and those suckers are going to break out in storms, and it causes a fall. So it definitely shortens the tree's life. A couple other things sometimes tree guys that will like to do, they do this tipping, so they go out to all the branches and they just tip them all. We're just going to shorten the tree, so we're just going to tip it all back. That just causes more little bitty growth in the branches at the end, and that's not the look. And then we talked about flush cuts. We make that mistake too, getting too close, getting past that branch bark ridge and cutting into the tree, and that's going to be a hard place for that tree to heal. So that was topping, flush cuts, we covered both of them. Flush cuts, so cutting too close to the collar, we're going to have a big
What
wound
about
there.
using that sealer, the type of sealer that you can use on the tree, is that helpful?
So it's not usually recommended, because there is one product that is recommended for that, but you can't get it. It's like sold in England or someplace. I don't know anymore now. I guess you can get it on the internet. But generally speaking, the research says that pruning sealants slow down the regrowth. The idea is that we don't want pests and diseases to get into that, so we're going to put the sealant over it. And that is a plus, but in the long run, it keeps that wound open for a longer period of time. What we really need is to prune it at the right time of the year, make sure it's getting adequate amount of water so it can do this really fast, okay? It gets that little healthy ring of growth, and it's going to start closing. And once that's closed, then it's just like the bark material on the outside. Nothing's going to get through there unless a wound happens or something like that. So we don't usually recommend pruning sealant. Just leave it, let it close up on its own. If you have a bigger wound than this will close up within a couple of seasons. But if you've got a large nail that you took off, something you can kind of cheat and help it a little bit is taking a pocket knife and going around that fresh material and scratching it, and it'll cause the tree to build more callus tissue. You can just go back and do it again, and you can just keep adding more callus tissue, and maybe get a little bit shorter time period over that healing process. Proper plant selection, again, making sure that, just a reminder that pruning cannot replace proper tree selection for the place, right? This doesn't look great. We don't want to do that. And then, I think, for whatever minutes we have left, which is 5, I'll show you some of my favorites really fast, okay? So I did a program. We'll go through this a little too fast, probably. But if you go to the Horticulture Webinar Wednesday YouTube channel, we've got almost 200 videos in there now of different agents and specialists, including our own, who have recorded trainings on all matters Picking out trees. I've done this one slide, I've done this talk on this slide for an hour, because it's so overwhelming. You go to a store, or you get a catalog, or you're on some website or something, and you're looking at all these trees, and then, wow, that tree, I like that tree, I like that tree, I don't know what to plant. These are the steps that you need to kind of walk through in your head when you're picking out plants, and it can be a little bit overwhelming. So some things that are very obvious to you, should be obvious to you, is the mature size and form. And what does that look like? Because I know sometimes we'll look at a tree on a site with a client, and they'll say, I got this 80-foot tree in my yard. We'll go and look at it, and their house is 3 stories, and this tree is shorter than their house. Is that really 80 feet? We generally say every story of a house is about 10 feet. So it's about 30 feet, actually, because it's hard. You don't know. We don't have anything to compare it against. So that's not as big as they thought, right? So think about that size, and then get out and look and see how big is this tree really going to be in my landscape. A lot of these things we've looked at, planting site already, susceptibility to pests, don't bring any problems. I cut an ash tree in case we did that, part of that. I don't know about here yet, we don't have it in our area, but we're not recommending ash trees anymore either because of the international. Probably not recommending planting those either. So, don't plant something you know is gonna have a problem. Sassafras is another good one, unfortunately. She's a nice little tree. Native versus non-native, I'll pick on that one for a minute. I think that, there's kind of 2 camps, you know, there's some that say, well, we're only supposed to plant what's native. This is what we should be growing here. And I can get behind a lot of that line of thinking. And there's others that are just fascinated by all the new stuff. Like, look at this, the flowers are purple or something. They've done something different to it. I think that it depends on your site, because unless you are living in a house that was built in the 1800s and nothing's been done to the landscape, your soil is not native, right? If it's a newer home, all that topsoil is raked off, and it's who knows what that is. And in many cases, something like a Japanese maple, or I should have said a Japanese cherry, can take that type of soil way better than one of our native trees, right? Because it's not normally grown in that type. So be aware that your site is going to really dictate what you plant. And sometimes it's not always the best answer to pick a native. Although I like to include those for other reasons too. Our master gardeners have done a bunch with native pollinators, and that's a big issue that we're having because honeybees get all the attention, but the native pollinators are disappearing, and it's because we don't plant enough natives, enough flowers and things. And out of all the natives that you could plant when it comes to trees, white oak is one of the best that we need. And as far as flowers, goldenrod is one of the best that we can plant for flowers. People don't like goldenrod, but
What's your definition of native? We had this debate a few weeks ago as to
did you?
what
Okay.
constituted a
but
native
it opened
plant.
a can of worms then. Do you mean how far back in time before it's native, or what do you mean?
Yeah, like we were like, is it been here 400 years, or was it brought by a human, or whatever?
Yeah, I don't have. All I can say to that is a frustration that I have. So on the community college campus in Hopkinsville, it's probably the largest Osage orange tree. Big, beautiful tree. They've done everything right to protect this tree, to grow it, and to keep it. And I tried to get it on the Kentucky, it's like the best of the best trees. And the response I got was, that's not a native tree. And I'm like, how in the world is it not a native tree? It's been here forever. And they're like, it was brought in by the Osage Indians, so it wasn't native. I'm like, nobody was around then. This counts. So it's not going to get on any record books anytime soon. I don't know. I don't fight that. I just plant what I like. Okay, in fact, I'm going to skip the rest of this because you know to look for these things. And you just need good resources to help you figure out. But probably, even if you go through all of this process, the big one for us, at least for me anyway, is finding them. I hate having to tell people when they give me all their conditions and they say, can you just recommend like 2 or 3 trees for me? Yeah, sure. This one, this one, and this one. Great for what you've got. Great. Where did I get them? Cannot get them. They're not available anywhere. I'm sorry, you're out of luck. You'll just have to buy what Lowe's sells. Okay. So just a few small trees really quick. I mentioned this one already. This is black thumb. This is Savatica, and this is why you might want to plant that tree. It's gorgeous fall color. It It does have a fruit that birds love, so you don't want to plant this where you park, right? A little bit further out away from the house would be better. That's a little big. This part of the presentation is about smaller trees, but this is a selection called Zydeco Twist. So that's another argument, right? Black gum, native tree. This is cultivar. Now, are we native or are we not native? I don't know, probably not. But it's a nice tree. That's what it looks like in the fall. Cornelian, oh, I missed the name. Cornelian cherry dogwood, Cornus mass is a great non-native dogwood tree that blooms yellow before anything else blooms in the landscape, except maybe witch hazel. It's a Theodore Klein winner, which is the Kentucky award, plant award that's given out through the Nursery Association. It has edible fruit, although you have to be really hungry. And this is the blooms for that tree on the left. And that's the one at our office right there. We have a really, it's much bigger than that one. Sweet Bay Magnolia, if you want a magnolia, this doesn't get any better than this. It smells so good. And it doesn't have any issues with blooms freezing off or any of those other things, but it's somewhat deciduous. It's probably going to drop all of its leaves in the fall of the year.
Are they messy like the southern magnolia?
No, there's no good reason. That southern magnolia has little big old thick glossy leaves and they get everywhere and your mower goes over them
And
laughs
fruit?
at you and it's awful, right?
Those are the ones that are skirted, right? Those are the beautiful,
Those are southern magnolias,
Oh,
yeah.
they're just
So one of the worst things that we do, of course, is we limb them up.
Oh, yeah.
And now you've got even a worse problem
Oh,
because
it's
those leaves
awful.
don't have a place to go. If you leave the big old branches, it might hide most of those leaves or you can blow them back in there. Anyway, that's Sweet Bay Magnolia. I really like using that one. This is another deciduous magnolia lavender. I put that in there. This is one that I had determined that I have a spot in my house that this is the one that I need. Can't find it. Not having enough. Serviceberry, here's another serviceberry. Edible fruit. Actually, it does taste pretty good. Birds, you gotta beat the birds to it. That's one at our office there in the top left. We also have it's way bigger than that now, but we have the only fir tree that you can grow in Kentucky, Nordman fir. Excellent evergreen, perfect Christmas tree, massive tree, but that's not in the slides, so it's too big.
What kind of fir tree is it?
Nordman.
Nordman.
This has a white bloom in the spring and then nice fall color and just an excellent tree. We plant this all the time. I don't know if I should say that or not, but we've had master gardeners for almost 20 years and we have one section of our property that has the best soil. So usually when we lose a master gardener, we plant a serviceberry in honor of that person and people in our office call it our master gardener graveyard. Anyway, this is what it looks like in bloom and that's fall color. Pawpaw trees, familiar with those? Anybody taste this before?
I haven't.
You either like it or you don't like it.
Yeah.
I'm not in love with it myself, but it is our only native tropical looking fruit that we have. But you don't even have to grow up for the fruit. It does have a really pretty flower and they're tough. We have a video on that too. So you can see what it looks like. It's got a good fall color. It's also the host plant for zebra swallowtails. So if you want to attract some butterflies, you can plant this tree. Chinese French tree, obviously not a native. We do have a native, the American French tree, but it's not nearly as prolific in blooms as the Chinese. So that's a great looking shrub, tough shrub. And I forgot to mention, there's a 70 and an 80 bear species rating. All of these slides say that. One of the publications that you'll see the link for here at the end talks about the longevity of plants or the appropriateness of plants for Kentucky. So the higher the number for the species rating, the better that it is. So I try to pick the ones that fit into that. I'm not going to tell you to plant one that's got a 20% rating. Japanese tree lilac is a pretty tough tree. It doesn't smell like regular lilac. It's a tree form, has big panicles and blooms. I think they look a little bit dirty late in the summer, like the white starts to fade to a yellow, and you're like, I don't know about that part, but I do like the tree overall. It's got really pretty bark, and that's what it looks like in full bloom. Redbuds, still plant redbuds. Those are native. You see we're flipping back and forth between native and non-native. There's room for both, I think.
You can make jam out of fun.
So excellent. My favorite, that's our office there, is this Appalachian redbud. And there's even some that are
My mother
very good.
ordered a bunch of bear fruit red buds, and she about 40 of them, and I've planted 5 of them.
Crab apples have gotten a bad rap because they get like 4 or 5 diseases, but the newer varieties don't get those diseases. So give them another shot. I guess the big downside to them are the fruit. Sometimes you get crab apples with fruit almost the size of a regular apple. They don't taste that great, although you can make them into jams and other stuff if you're so inclined. But now there's cultivars with a very tiny, so they'll disappear in the landscape. And they come in all these different colors and forms now, so I would say take a look at that. I don't recommend flowering dogwood or native dogwood unless you've got the right type of soil, good rich organic matter, and afternoon shade. But Kusa dogwood or Chinese dogwood doesn't care. Put it where you want it, it's going to grow great. And it's an excellent looking tree. It's different from our flowering dogwood in that with our native one, it blooms first and then the leaves show up. This one, the leaves show up and then the blooms show up. There's a brand new one that just came out last year that's got all red flowers, so that's amazing. It also has a fruit that's edible, and it's okay. There it is in full bloom. And there's a very good one called Wolf Eyes, and there's so if you know how to use one of these QR codes, you just use your regular camera and hold it up there, and it will pop up and say, open this in whatever your browser is, Google probably. And that's going to take you to our Horticulture Webinar Wednesday webpage, or it's also called Kentucky Hort News. And there's a page in there with resources for trees. That's exactly where it'll take you to. You just scroll down and you've got links to every UK and some other university publications about trees, so you can remember about planting and irrigation and fertilization and all of those things. What did I forget to show you at the table? What about spacing? Sometimes a tool like this can be very helpful. It's certainly used a lot with fruit trees, but even in landscape trees, I have a crabapple tree and the branch was just a little too close, but I didn't want to cut it off. So you can get little spacers like this that go in between the trunk and the branch, and you train that. Put it here. There. Train that branch to grow this way instead of wanting to grow this way, right? You stick it in there and it'll grow. Or if it's a bigger branch, you can use something bigger like that. And this is also another thing you could use in case you can't find this, or you might find this to be easier. You can unwrap this to protect your tree from that southwest trunk injury, and you take it off and put it away. It's also pretty good for the wintertime on fruit trees to keep voles and other varmints from rabbits and things from chewing on the bark of your newly planted apple tree, which is a pain. Any questions?
Me.
And you plant gardenia